A lot of people have dove into the conversation, especially with some lackluster adaptations of the IP, on what they would do with the future Goosebumps show. And with the most recent Disney Plus show getting essentially put on ice, so we don't know what's going to happen with it. Right now, it's effectively canceled. Somebody else might pick it up, who knows? But I highly doubt it. So people have been kind of coming up with their own ideas and takes on what they would do if a future Goosebumps show were to come back. And that's been kind of a common hot topic where people want a new show to come out. Everyone's got different ideas on what they think is good. So I'm just going to be giving my take on what I think a future Goosebumps show should do. And the reason I got this inspiration was shout out to Pulp Fiction Books on Instagram. Really cool dude. He reviews a lot of different horror books, kids horror, YA horror, all that. He'd actually written this question on my Q&A, which is going to be upcoming towards the end of this week, which was essentially like, what would you do if you were to resurrect the Goosebumps show in the future? How would you go about approaching it? So Pulp Fiction, I'm going to give you a little bit of an early answer to that one. I'll still answer it on the Q&A, but I'm going to give you my take on what I think would be a good idea for a future Goosebumps show if ever it comes back. In terms of my experience and what I think would be a good idea in terms of nice balance and getting some fun stuff for a future show. Right away, I'm going to knock off the idea of faithful adaptations. And the reason why I say that is because if you have some of the best stories out there, like Dead House, like Werewolf of Fever Swamp, like Cuckoo Clock of Doom, some of the Night of Living Dummy books, or, The Haunted Mask is the biggest one. There's already the books out there, which you can go pick up and read, and those books are amazing, and they're not long reads. They're literally like 120, 130 pages. You can fly through them with the way the books are set up, and you can really imagine up and cook up the story. And in the original 90s Goosebumps show, let's use Haunted Mask as an example. You have the book, which a lot of people consider to be fantastic or perfect. I'm one of them. You have the episode, which is massively beloved from the 90s show. Some people like the episode more than they do the book. The episode is amazing as well. And you even have the Haunted Mask 2 episode from the 90s show. Now that's adapting Haunted Mask 2's book, but it has almost nothing, very little in common with the actual book. It's more so a continuation from where we kind of left off with the Haunted Mask 1 episode, except now it's next Halloween. So in terms of the content that's already out there, there's plenty of content out there for amazing Goosebumps books you can pick up for those stories. And the fact that there's already great episodes out there, even if those episodes changed up stuff, it's still like, it kind of, some people treat those as like the canon themselves, because R.L. Stine was involved with the show at points and even gave early scripts for episodes. So his involvement with the 90s show was there. And in terms of a show in the future having like brand new stories, stories that are adapting other kids' horror stories from people that feel like Goosebumps, or maybe whoever's in charge of the show is writing up their own stuff. That would be interesting to see. I would like to see that because I'm often looking for other media or stories or stuff that feels like Goosebumps, and I usually call it out to my friends or whatever when I find it, and other fellow reviewers, or even you guys if I make a video. But people are not going to be, cool with that, because if there's a brand new Goosebumps show coming out and people already had problems with, some new stuff that was being made, if people see that there's brand new stories being just made from other people or being adapted from other people, they're going to look like, okay, that's interesting, but that's not what we're looking for in terms of a Goosebumps show. That's why in the 90s show, Trilogy and More Monster Blood were not talked by really anybody, even though I think that those episodes are good to great. People just kind of dismiss them because they're original stories. Stein had zero involvement with those. So they just sort of dismiss them and treat them as either bad or act like, they're not worth any conversation. So is what it is. So with that basis, if faithful adaptations are not what I'm looking for, because there's already plenty of content and the original stuff is easily out there to go and experience and read by what Stein cooked up. And brand new stories are not going to fly with people because it's going to be easily dismissed, and people aren't going to want that if they want to see the IP getting some shine. Then what's my take on what the future show should do? Well, in a way, it's kind of a balance between those two. What I think would be a good decision for a future Goosebumps show, not that I don't know if I have any power or influence over it, but I'm just throwing my idea out there, would be that I would want the selected roster of different Goosebumps stories and books to be given to other prolific or talented authors, whether they be in any genre, adult horror, young adult horror, kids horror, given to other prolific authors or other notable screenplay writers and stuff, and ask them, what would be your take on this story? Give them a general synopsis, or they can go to the wiki or find out, what the story is about, and then ask them, like, can you cook up your own version of the story? What would be your interpretation or your own version of it? And then that's what gets made into an episode. So for example, I'll give the book Scarecrow Walks at Midnight, and then I'll give you two adult horror authors who have written Scarecrow stories that almost feel like if you gave them this idea, this is what they would have included. The first one up is Joe R. Lansdale, one of my favorite horror authors I've been reading, super creative guy. He had written a kid's horror story called The Companion. Now, The Companion was not officially listed as a kid's horror story, but it has a middle grade protagonist, and although kids' horror stories can get dark, this one has no real blood or gore or really sinister stuff in it that would not fly, so it's safe to be a kid's horror story. So I treat it as a kid's horror story. And it involves a kid going to a farmland. He lives out in the country, and he finds this scarecrow which becomes sentient and comes to life. Now, it's a vampire scarecrow kind of hybrid thing, but I feel like, let's say as a hypothetical, that Lansdale had the idea for The Companion, but he never wrote it, just as a hypothetical. And the Goosebumps show writers, maybe in the future were to come up to him and be like, hey, can you give us your interpretation of Scarecrow Walks at Midnight? Here's the plot line of it. Read it over and then give us your idea as to what you would do with this story. I feel like he would have included the aspects that were in his mind about The Companion into his version of Scarecrow Walks at Midnight. So we would have had some vampire scarecrow kind of hybrid things going on. You would have had similar types of action scenes between the kids and the scarecrow fighting each other and it hunting them down and using the sunlight and all those aspects. So I love that short story, and that definitely feels like if you were to give him a scarecrow story, he would have taken aspects of it. So that's sort of my idea behind it. And similar along that line, there is a short story by Tim Curran, which I've never read before because it's unrepublished. It's from a very obscure magazine that featured monster stories called Alan Kay's Inhuman Magazine. But in issue 5, there's a title of Tim Curran's story in there, which is called Scarecrows in the Nebraska Moonlight. Now, of course, I've not read the story, so I don't know what it's about. But from the title, it gives off a Scarecrow Walks at Midnight vibes. And I've read almost all of Curran's stories. I've read all 117 of his short stories, 22 novellas, 4 novels. I know the type of stuff the guy writes. And I feel like if you were to give him Scarecrow Walks at Midnight, he would take aspects or ideas similar to Scarecrows in the Nebraska Moonlight and include it in his version of the story. Especially because Nebraska Moonlight is the only Scarecrow story we know that he's ever written. So that's my sort of thinking process behind this. If you give the books to prolific horror authors like Joe Hill, Joe R. Lansdale, other guys, or even other kids horror authors that are in the game, like let's say Neil Shusterman, you could give them different books and tell us like, okay, now you give us your take. And stuff like this was almost done before. George Romero almost made his own movie version of Dead House. And he's obviously one of the most prolific and well-known, zombie, undead, horror movie producers and directors out there. So him doing his version of Dead House, which the whole plot of it is like on a Bloody Disgusting article you could look up, or his script is out there, I think. That's exciting because you're giving it to an adult horror director and producer known for his zombie movies, and you're giving a kid's horror story about kind of zombies to a guy like that. So it'd be very fun, it'd be very cool, and it'd be very interesting in my opinion. And I think Tim Burton at one point almost got his hands on Goosebumps. So these things have kind of been teased, but they've never been executed. I want to see the execution of this. So if you were to make a new show, you could have weekly episodes or whatever being premiered or released. And you could have basically like, let's say, The Cuckoo Clock of Doom presented by Joe R. Lansdale, his version of the story. You could have Beware the Snowman presented by Joe Hill. You could have Calling All Creeps presented by Neil Shusterman. And if you have other well-known, even screenplay writers, not book authors, but screenplay writers involved in the movie industry or TV industry. You could give them books and stories as well and keep giving us their takes, because they have different backgrounds, they have their own resumes, they have their own, strengths and expertise and stuff like that. So seeing them cook up a story based off of just the general idea and plot of that book would be fun. You would see some cool stuff being added. You could possibly see some stuff that they do better than Stein. The whole idea of changing up the story. That's what was really popular in the original 90s Goosebumps show. Werewolf of Fever Swamp, Haunted Mask, Night of Living Dummy 3. They would change up the plot and change aspects of it to make it slightly or even better than the books themselves. If the books are good, they make them better. If the books are bad, they give them a huge upgrade. So people have always jived with that idea, and I think it'll work this time around. Finally honoring that whole idea that never came into fruition of giving Tim Burton a Goosebumps story, giving George Romero a Goosebumps story. Well, now what if you give all these other different authors, takes on Goosebumps stories? You can see what they cook up and what they want to do. And matter of fact, you see a lot of, people in the Goosebumps community a lot of the times do it themselves. You see them making their own rewrites of Goosebumps stories or episodes. You see them writing their own fanfics and stuff. So I feel like that would be a nice balance where, yes, you are getting honored the Goosebumps books. They are being brought in. They're going to have the same type of general plots and vibes and feels. But the stories are going to be much more unique and changed up, so you can get a fresh perspective, a fresh spin on the story by people who are not just no-name screenplay writers like from some of these adaptations that we've gotten, where effectively they're sort of not well known and they do their own funky thing with the story. No, these are going to be prolific, well-known authors, screenplay writers, maybe even directors and producers. So you'll have a resume available, and maybe even a well-liked resume that could be then implemented into the story. So I think that that's the way to go if you give me the opportunity to pitch a Goosebumps show idea in the future. I think it's a nice balance, and I'd like to see it, man. I oftentimes talk about, adult horror authors writing kids horror stories, but that's more so people who have switched over to kids horror and they're writing their own brand new stories. But what if you gave those same guys that I'm always praising, scripts, plot lines of already existing books, and then telling them, yeah, cook it up, recook it, remix up the ingredients and give us your own spin on the recipe. That would be interesting. So that's all I really got for this video. It was just something that was kind of circulating in my head, and I'm like, you know what, might as well talk about it. And I did appreciate that comment by Pulp Fiction Books. Again, shout out to you for bringing it into it. And also I had a discussion in a Discord server like a day ago about this kind of thing. So yeah, that's my own idea. That's me throwing my pitch into the ring. Not that it'll probably come into fruition, but you never know. I made a video about adult horror authors writing kids horror books, and so far we've had like 2 extra people join the ring and get in there. So you never know what God has in hold, or whoever's listening on the internet. Sometimes people are just lurking and looking for ideas. So yeah, all of you guys out there, if you enjoyed this video and you enjoy my other content, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, comment down below your thoughts. What are your thoughts about this idea? Do you have your own thoughts or your own pitch that you want to give? You can comment it. And stay tuned for the next content to come. I'll probably release like another book review, maybe by like Friday or something. And I will be doing a brief last roll call announcement video for the Q&A. I've gotten comments on my post and on, I think, some other platforms about people messaging me, their questions. But in that video, last minute roll call, you can put down your questions you have, and then I'll shoot the video and release it maybe on Saturday or Sunday this weekend. So yeah, thank you so much for 2K subscribers. Thank you so much for always coming back and supporting my videos. And all of you guys out there, have a blessed day. See you till the next time.